I'm Lee Schneider, and this is the Future Lab. Welcome to Season 2. I'll be asking my guests about the state today of science fiction, fantasy writing, and publishing. Expect to hear from your favorite authors, editors, industry experts about writing and publishing the books you love to read. My guest today is Robin Sloan. Robin was raised and educated in Michigan, and he worked for about a decade at the intersection of media and technology before publishing his first novel. Now he splits his time between the San Francisco Bay Area and the San Joaquin Valley of California, where he makes extra virgin olive oil under the label Fat Gold. He has written fiction and commentary for many publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, and MIT Technology Review. His novels have been translated into more than a dozen languages. I've read all three of his published novels, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, Sourdough, and his most recent, Moonbound. They all have that signature Robin Sloan tone of optimism, weirdness, and unexpected twists. When I read his work, I stop often and say to myself, wow, I've never seen words put together in that order just like that. Please welcome Robin Sloan to the Future Lab. Welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure.
Let's talk a little bit about the pleasure of making things. I know you make olive oil because I just ordered some, and we have to have olive oil around here or else things stop working. And you've written about the pleasures of old computers and old technology. You have a whole book about which displays a deep understanding of sourdough bread, even to the point of sentience. So pretty radical there. And I read that at a time when we were making a lot of sourdough around here. So my question is, was this always the case for you, or is it something you've come into, this kind of joy of the maker reality?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer, as I think back, is sort of two things at once. On one hand, my adult life has definitely been let me put it this way. I was a computer kid and a reader. And I think if you had met me at age 12 or 13, you would not have thought this is a kid who is ever going to bake a loaf of sourdough bread or manufacture olive oil or run big machines or really find any interest in that kind of stuff. At the same time, I think if you had looked closely, if you had maybe been a little charitable in your assessment, you would have noticed that I was drawing and printing out comic books, that I was making web pages. As soon as that was something that was available to me in for me, it was very late high school, and then of course early college. There was this thing called the web, and there was a thing called a web browser, and the fact that those were just so malleable, and they were like, it was the digital version of going to Kinko's. Of course, I'm betraying my vintage there. Going to Kinko's, the copy shop, and
You mean FedEx office?
yeah, right, whatever. And so as I reflect on it, I realized that the impulse was always there. I always was somebody who, I think some of it is temperamental. It's almost beneath the level of conscious choice. It just got wired in at some point, and I'm happy that it did. But I always did love making media, both physical and digital media. And then I think to my great benefit, through choices of my own and also just some good random chance, those interests kind of broadened to encompass more things than just comics and books and websites.
It's been one of the pleasures of reading your work and reading your blog and your output generally is you have this omnivorous approach where it doesn't matter if it's physical. It's nice when it's physical, but it could also be digital. It could also be something you've built. You've coded some apps.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to Robin's website and see how many people have his books on hold in libraries.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting. Is it just that you don't need the distinction? It's just like, let's use the tools at hand?
Yeah. And, I actually think it's, going back to that interest in that, my early interest in computers, and again, certainly I would have self-identified as someone who is interested in, air quotes, technology. And it took me probably a little too long to understand that everything is technology.
Right.
The kitchen is packed full of technology. It's anyway,
Yeah.
what a suite of incredible tools that have been honed and refined and advanced over, generations and generations. I think something that actually, it's interesting to reflect on sometimes the practical benefits in your own life of creative work, or even of something like
Mm.
writing a novel. I think often of my research, actually, my reading, of the history of the book and of publishing and of libraries and things like that, for Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, which was my first novel. And, of course, I went into that project with a great interest in books, as well as technology. And about halfway through that project of learning and reading, I mean, I just realized that there is no distinction whatsoever. And especially at that time, maybe that point seemed a little sharper because a lot of folks really wanted you to choose sides, as it were. This is
Mm.
the 2010s, and it's the era of the Kindle, and the ebook was still kind of a new thing at that time. And so you'd hear like, oh, well, which will it be? Where will you plant your flag, on the side of books or on the side of technology? And that my it's not a great insight, but is my insight that I came late to, is that the question is malformed.
Mm.
Books are profound technology, and not just a heritage technology. They continue to change and improve, and the tools for their production are constantly changing and getting better and more capable. Anyway, that is all to say. That's a really long-winded way of saying, yeah, I do refuse to choose, but I think that refusal is quite principled, because I think it's all sort of the same thing, or it's all just versions of the same thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm remembering and probably misremembering an Ursula Le Guin quote about she was being taken to task for not writing hard science fiction. And she said something like, similar to what you just said, it's all technology.
Yeah,
To the right person, a campfire is technology.
yeah,
It
absolutely.
doesn't matter. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's a version of that's a little cute, and you kind of go, oh, okay, well, oh, thanks, I guess. But I think there's another version that's quite profound, and by looking at those things as technologies, by not consigning them to, oh yes, it's so cute and warm and fuzzy, and it's, heritage and it's tradition, but by saying like, oh no, this is rich, real, muscular stuff, hard fought too. Like,
hmm,
again, the kitchen has become a favorite site of this analysis for me. You can pick up any tool, you
right.
could pick up the most bargain basement chef's knife that you got from Target or whatever, and that thing is a absolute miracle of metallurgy and mass production and shipping, to say nothing of the shipping, that brought it to the Target shelf. So I think that's right. I think that analysis is actually the right one at the end of the day.
And I love that about for listeners being introduced to Robin's books. It's Mr. Penumbra's, it's Sourdough, and Moonbound.
That's right.
Moonbound being the last, and quite a big departure in tone, anyway,
Yeah.
but maybe not in technology. Just to continue on that theme, because the technology of wizardry, space travel, it's all still there. It's kind of a Jules Verne-esque in the future vision of what that technology would get us. But I find that fascinating that there's a question in here somewhere. I'm getting to it. You find a really humanist take on machines and
Yeah.
on technology. It's not about some kind of AI that's going to take over our jobs or some kind of nonsense. There's a real integration in, say, just to pick one thing out of a many layered book, the way cities are seen.
Yeah.
What will the cities of the future be like? Well, they're going to have recycling. They're going to have roads many ways in, many ways out. There's going to be housing that serves lots of people, not just the elite. And that's all technology, but it's not presented as such, which I
Yeah.
find fascinating, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, again, not to ever not to ever kind of pose as somebody who had it figured out from the beginning or was, just bringing, their wisdom to the table. I really acknowledge my own evolution in this regard. And I personally, if I wasn't the writer, I think it'd be kind of interesting to look at the sequence of books by this author, Robin Sloan, as an indication of someone's evolution and kind of unfolding awareness of this scope of technology, and also, I mean, frankly, the richness of the physical.
Hmm.
There is physical stuff, and certainly a celebration of the physical printed book in Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. But then you go from there to sourdough, and it's a lot goopier, There's sourdough starter, and people doing stuff, all sorts of real stuff in real space. And then, yeah, I actually think that really does accelerate and expand in Moonbound. And I wanted, one of the things I myself appreciate as a writer about certain science fictions is a real tactile material
Hmm.
future. People talk about the future that has some like rust and grit and dirt, and
Right.
yeah, the dirt under the fingernails of the future. And I want to do at least attempt to create some of that solidity, that real sense of real mass in space, for my far future. It's
Right.
it's both, as some folks listening might know, or I'll be telling some for the first time. The story is set 13,000 years in the future, and when you're working that far in the future, it's both a burden because it's sort of comical, like no one could ever know what's going to happen, but it's also quite freeing because no
Yes.
one can ever know what's going to happen. So you can just imagine anything you want.
Yeah, the world building of the three books, including the tactile, including with sourdough, with bread.
Yeah.
Sidebar, my son read that. When he read it, he was about 11, and he's not a big fan of super abstract books. But he read that and loved it because we were making sourdough at the
Yeah.
time, and it was his introduction to the three body problem and other books that were far more
Awesome. Oh
abstract.
man, that's
So,
great. That's ideal. That's an ideal when a book is not only enjoyed but also becomes like a bridge or a springboard. That's the
yeah.
coolest thing. That's great.
Yeah, because the notion of world building, we get pretty heady about that.
Yeah.
And your people are not only are they real, but they're extraordinarily kind. There's this undertow, for science fiction to be described as kind, or even fantasy to be described as kind, is, I think, very unusual. I don't know how
Sure.
you feel about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I agree with you. Why is that? I actually think back. For me, first of all, it's a good observation, and I think it's actually a very interesting observation. There's a sense, you encounter this a little bit more in discussions about like script writing for movies and TV, kind of the
Mhm.
televisual arts. But there's a little bit of backwash into novels too, and the discussion is about stakes, the stakes of a story, and the observation, which is not wrong, is that a story with high stakes, literal life or death, maybe of whole kingdoms, or the universe itself or whatever, it's quite gripping, right? You just know. In fact, I read an advanced copy of a novel coming out, and it has scenes of such peril, and I mean, it was that feeling of being absolutely glued to the page. There was no way conceivable that I was going to put down that book because I had to know
Mhm.
how this stuff was resolved.
Yeah.
So the observation that stakes are important, and that these dire stakes, and often that I think is twinned with a certain kind of grimness, or yeah, there's darkness there. I mean, that's often the engine for those kind of stakes. So that's the observation. Back when I was writing Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore in an early draft, I mean, kind of a primordial version of the book, I was, an obedient student of these lessons, or trying to be. And I was putting in all this stuff. I mean, this is quite embarrassing, honestly, but I will reveal that there were these scenes where, like, I don't know, bibliophile ninjas were like invading the 24-hour bookstore, and they were on a mission, and you could imagine it out of some Christopher Nolan movie. They were rappelling in, and it was wild. Part of this, this ancient cult. Very, very cinematic. And as I was writing it, and kind of contemplating what I was putting down on the page, I realized that if it was me in this adventure, if I was the character on the page, at the instant the first ninja appeared, I would say, well, I'm good. Nope. I gotta go, guys. I'm going home. I would call the police. I would leave, and that would be the end of the story. And of course, you can then there's kind of two responses to that. One is you can engineer a way around that so that the character is in even greater peril, and they don't have any alternatives other than to confront the ninjas.
Right.
Or you can take the path that I took, which was to say, or kind of to accept the challenge, which is like, can I produce a story that is compelling and magnetic and like unputdownable, um, but exists within but below the threshold of like the stakes of the real world and real life as we know it? And I just really thought the answer to that was yes. It had to be yes, because in our day-to-day life, we encounter things that are very dramatic, and we tell our friends stories about them, and we obsess about them, and we worry about them, and mostly it's not ninjas.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Mostly. And so, anyways, I think that actually was a pretty important kind of level set for my whole fiction writing career, because I made that choice. I wrote the book that way. And in my estimation, and then certainly in the reading public, it was very successful. I mean, I think people agreed with my assessment, and they took the gambit, and it worked. So ever since, I've kind of thought, I think maybe that's kind of my role, right? Maybe that's my slot or my niche. I can find ways to produce stories that are just they are charismatic and gripping and magnetic and interesting and all that kind of stuff, but that can all unfold within the realm of, like, I mean, yeah, as you say, kindness and a certain amount of warmth. Sometimes the shorter way to say it is, it is not necessary for people to be like tied to chairs and beaten with hoses. It's
Right. Yeah.
that's actually strictly optional.
Right. Yeah. Well, the original rule is first kill Bambi's mother.
Yeah,
That's what you
right.
do first to create
Yep.
high stakes. And there are
Yep.
many great writers like Neil Schusterman, who wrote Scythe, which is about killing people. The whole series is about basically killing people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a gripping book, but I find I'm getting kind of Grim Reaper fatigue
Yeah.
in reading some books. And of course, I'm going to say I don't get that with your books, because
Yeah.
it has to do with the world building. When
Yeah.
you build a world that we can care about the people. Yes, it matters that your brother is in danger by a wizard who's gone insane. That's a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
But it's not literally the gun at your head kind of problem. And
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot more work in reminding the audience, and just more fully realized characters, and there's just a lot more heavy lifting there that has to be done.
Well, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that assessment. And of course, I think you're right. And mostly, I always want to insist that it can be done, and it's kind of worth just providing the examples, so there's other folks out there writing or imagining stories and how they might come together, and the gravity of that high stakes, grim and grisly universe. It's more potent than it's ever been. It feels mandatory sometimes. Certainly you look at film and TV, and you're like, wow, it's multiple streaming services just packed full of malignant characters kind
Right.
of clawing at each other. And you're like, really? Is this reality? Is this the human condition? I mean, I would actually layer another piece onto that, which was another decision that I made in the composition of Penumbra, and have carried forward ever since. Talk about the insane wizard, and all the other villains, air quotes,
Right.
villains that I've had in my books. I decided that I was never going to put a line in any character's mouth, including a notion of villains, that was, to me, obviously wrong and stupid. It was never going to be a case of, kind of, being the ventriloquist and then turning to the puppet and saying, hey, get a load of this asshole, right?
Right.
It's kind of a cheap shot against a fictional character who doesn't have any choice. More interesting, I thought, to make it all true, because I mean that is also our real world. I mean, you could have a group of 10 smart, thoughtful people, and they could all opine about something, and many of those opinions and statements would be contradictory, and you'd have to say, well, this is interesting, isn't it? How do I resolve this? And so that's not to say that agree with everything that everybody says equally in all of my books. There's some sentiments that are closer to my heart. But I mean, if a person was highly motivated, uh, and perhaps fulfilling the graduate requirements for a very specific degree program, they could go through my novels, and they could pick out all the lines, the lines from Corvina, the head of the bibliophile cult in Penumbra, lines from Mr. Marrow, the mysterious sort of presiding figure of this strange experimental kind of farmer's market in Sourdough,
Mm.
and then certainly all the lines from Mallory in Moonbound, and you'd line them all up on the page, and there would not be a single thing on that page that I didn't think at least was an interesting thought to have.
Hmm. Well, yeah, it makes it harder to dismiss them as just,
Yeah,
oh, that's Voldemort or,
right,
or whatever.
exactly. The pure cartoon.
Yeah,
Right,
they
right,
all
right.
have noses and, I've written cartoons and I've written for Thundercats and I've
Oh
written some
yeah.
villains, and those Skeletor kind of people are
Yeah, it is. It's super
pretty
perfect.
easy to write for,
Sure, sure. I mean, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
there's a place. To be clear, I do. I mean, there's a place in our culture for the Skeletors and the
yeah.
Megatrons and the I was about to say Doctor Doom, but actually Doctor Doom is quite interesting. Doctor
Hmm.
Doom's got some texture. So
Yeah. I wanted to seg a little into what some people consider the evil villain of our time, which is AI,
yeah,
and your approach to technology, which is, look, you're a tech guy,
yeah,
you have the ability to even code things and make things in the tech world, plus books and love books and physical things. But I read your zine that, you sent it to me in the mail,
in the
just a
mail, the old
real
USPS. Yeah,
and I've given a lot of thought myself to the encroachment of AI on what we're working on. Like,
yeah,
yes, I use some of these tools. I do not put any fiction writing into them ever, but I
yeah.
do put promotional copy, and I'm trying to keep the world separate. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
do you do that, and how long do you think you will do that? And will there be a breaking point?
It's a first of all, just I want to acknowledge the question. It is the question, and it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. It's
Hmm.
not like another 9 months will pass and we'll all say, "Oh, we figured that one out. Thank goodness." I think it is an epochal tension, and it's not going away. It's only going to increase. Um, yeah, I will answer your question, but I do. I just want to.
No, no,
I
that's
feel like I'm inflating a beach balloon. I just want to pump it up even more. Um, because and again, and I also think it's easy to say, on one hand, it's easy, of course, to say, oh, this is like the doom of art. It's also easy to say, some of the, I think, really thoughtful, defenders of AI and all sorts of tech tools, they point to things like, the invention of photography and say, oh, people said the same thing. And what happened? No, it just ushered in a new, new forms, new techniques, new interests, new aesthetics and all that. Um, Again, I think it's kind of all true. And the net of it is that it's hugely perilous. I think it's perilous. I mean, I think there is a real chance that in some number of years, I don't think it's 2 or 5 or even 10, but like forms of art, and sort of genres and formats that we know and love now could essentially be gone because they kind of don't make sense in a world of whatever
yeah.
infinite imagery and
Mhm.
just virtuosic prose on demand. So I don't have any answers to that or at this point even really any strategies, but I do think that's kind of the severity of the
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm.
And for people who are inventive and are curious, there's also certainly some opportunities there as well. So nice warm up, Sloan. What do you actually do? I don't use it for any kind of writing, and I guess for me it's partially principled, and partially just because when I have dipped in to just test the waters, the quality has not
That's
risen
what you do.
to my
Yeah.
standards. I will say that here's something that might be a little unique to my perspective and my experience, that other folks might kind of in a sense take for granted. I started using these tools or started exploring these tools quite a few years ago. I mean, this was before the explosion and really the
Mhm.
revolution of Chat GPT, and certainly before the capability of these new modern models. And they, again, even the harshest critic has to acknowledge it's incredible.
Right.
The fact that you can pose these questions to and challenges to a computer and have it complete them in seconds in plain human language is a beyond generational. It's an
Mhm.
epochal achievement. But go back, not that many years, 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
there were these little wimpy versions of these models that could kind of generate, I don't know, modernist poetry. It was a little wonky,
Right.
but it was interesting. And the thing that I found especially compelling at that time is that you actually made the model yourself. So rather than it being a
Yeah.
product that you access in a far off data center that's been trained at great expense by Google or OpenAI or whoever, it was this weird little thing that you cooked up yourself. And I'm talking
Mm.
to you in this little office that I have. It's full of books and printing equipment. And years ago, I've got a computer in the corner. And years ago, I would set it up overnight to train a modest, primitive little language model, and I would feed it old public domain science fiction stories, and,
Amazing.
and, and stuff I had gotten off of Project Gutenberg or the Internet Archive. That was so interesting to me that, I mean, the results of it were not anything to really write home about and certainly nothing to publish. But the idea that the model was actually something that could be another part of my artistic output or creative decision making was super compelling to me.
Mm.
One of the main things that has changed is that that's no longer possible. These big models requires so much data and so much time and so many computer chips to make. This is way, way, way beyond the scope of what I can do in this little office. And so you rely on the Googles and the OpenAIs. And here we finally arrive back at kind of my hang up. I don't know what they trained this thing on,
Yeah.
and it's this, for me, it's this really pretty deeply unsettling uncertainty where, even if on a superficial level I pose a question and something reasonable comes back, I just imagine all the garbage in there and the possibility they could kind of bubble up like a little bubble of swamp gas, some just crazy, gnarly, nasty stuff from deep in the bowels of the internet, which by the way, it certainly has read. So for all those reasons, I'm pretty happy to consult the models for programming advice,
Very
to
good.
ask them like, oh, this code isn't working, or like, what's the right syntax to do this, particular thing in a web page. But when it comes to writing, I don't use them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think good. Uh, for me, it's really a question of who owns it, who's
Yeah.
controlling it, who's it helping, who's it hurting.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
and
just
those are good questions. They
right.
really, those are sharp questions that almost should you can imagine them kind of in a little bar across
Yeah.
every page on Chat GPT and Claude and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. I was rereading Blood in the Machine, Brian Merchant's book about the
Yeah.
Luddites, and there is room for, I don't know if we'll end up calling them new Luddites, but there is room for people who are just not going to buy into every new piece of technology when it comes
Yeah.
on the scene. It's just not useful.
Yeah, and again, boy, Brian Merchant is great. And I haven't read that book, but I've followed his work, and which continues, and I think it's
Yeah.
just he's doing really urgent, worthwhile thinking, and kind of, I feel like he's really working in the polemic tradition, which is fun. He just is. He's totally on fire, and something that I is in there in the history of the Luddites, and actually just in a lot of technology history for decades now, is that there's many different versions of new technology, and they have different values baked into them. And there's plenty of technologies that we use. I would say for my part that the web itself is one of them that actually are more print like, and they kind of replicate some of those really wonderful values of print. And you can enumerate what all those are. There's a
Right.
democracy and a certain kind of privacy and blah blah blah. You can go on and on. And I think some technologies and some tools, like they kind of map to that better, and there's others that clearly don't. And the ones that any kind of internet service, which is most of them these days, that like requires you to like log in and give it all your data and slurps it all up to
Mhm.
use for its own obscure purposes. You kind of go, okay, well maybe that's not the kind of technology I'm excited about. And so again, it's not that you're Yeah, it's you want the opportunity to pick and choose and say, yeah, am I pro or anti technology? Again, the question is malformed. It's
Yeah.
about what values I personally sort of subscribe to and want to see replicated and then even kind of enhanced by the tools we use.
Right. I want to mention your newsletter, and I will include a link because anyone listening to this, you should definitely subscribe. It comes out, if I'm not mistaken, every 29.5 days,
Yeah,
right?
I try to sync it up with the full moon. I
Right.
sometimes slip a little bit, but that's the
That's
framework.
the
That's the general
goal.
framework. Yeah.
And it just has an amazing amount of material. And every time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, how in the world do you have time to read all this stuff and put it into the newsletter? So
Yeah.
do you have a, 25-hour day, or what's
Yes,
going
I
on there?
wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great if I was like, and for my, oh yes, I didn't tell you, in my youth that I invented a 25-hour a day machine. It's been the
Right.
secret to my success. That would be fantastic. I will tell you the real secret. I am, as a writer and just as a person in the world, I have strengths that I'm aware of, and I also obviously have weaknesses that I'm very aware of. I would say one of my great strengths, maybe my top strength, is I am a really, really good note taker.
Hmm.
I started the habit years and years ago, mostly paper to start. It really was a, scribbling in little field notes, notebooks kind of writer. And I still do that. But I've also actually built for myself a lot of note capturing tools.
Hmm.
And it's nothing that would be useful to anybody else. It really is a strange little Rube Goldberg machine that just fits Robin and Robin's brain perfectly. But the upshot of that is that I have an extremely low bar for capturing something. I mean, when people ask for writing advice, really of any kind, this is actually the first thing I say. Forget about, prose or, developing a plot or any of that. I mean, you get there eventually, but
Hmm.
before all that, you do have to have material. And I think nearly everyone would be, certainly everyone who wants to be a writer of some kind, uh, would be incredibly well served by taking about 4 times as many notes or more as they currently do, regardless of that current volume.
Right.
And it's just because you have a thought, or you overhear something in the world, or you read a little snippet in a book or on a web page, and you think, oh, that's interesting. And then sometimes you think, oh, I'll remember that. You
You
won't.
don't. Yeah.
You definitely won't. And so it's just such a favor to your future self and potentially the readers of your email newsletter or your books or
Hmm.
whatever it is to just save it. And then later, I've got a whole systems where I kind of go back through that pile of stuff and I look at it again. And some things I toss, other things I file into kind of different channels. And it's because of that that actually I mean, the production of the newsletter does take some work, but it's a lot more manageable and kind of just something that's become for me a little bit of a machine, a little kind of a
Right.
weekly and monthly machine, all because I just am really good at socking away the good stuff.
Yeah, well, I too, I use paper notebooks, Leuchtturm
Hmm.
notebooks, Japanese notebooks, and all the read it later things.
Yeah,
And I find the best thing really is I'll pick up, notebook number 23 at the end of the month, and I'll just go through and make an index. I basically
that's great.
read
That's great.
everything in the notebook and just do an index, which I later do either digitize or copy into some searchable form. But that retrospective is it, because
Yeah,
that helps so much just
it really
doing
does.
that.
And I love that. I do. It's funny. That's interesting that you describe it that way. I do something very similar. The output is a little different. I don't do an index. I essentially do a digitization step. So I
Right.
go through the paper notebook essentially when it's full or when I just feel like it's time to move on to a new one,
Mhm.
and I just go through. Again, it's that second encounter. You sort of
Yeah.
see it again and you think about it again. And sometimes I don't really do anything other than read it, type it, and I've got a couple different programs that I use to store all this stuff, kind of some that's more general thoughts and others
Mhm.
that are really focused on fiction. That's, whether it's like in development or just something that's going to be way, way, way in the
Right.
future. But I transcribe it digitally, and I do think that's important in the modern world. And then it's very satisfying. I scribble it out of the notebook. I go chicka, 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 chicka,
Oh,
chicka,
cool.
chicka.
Wow.
And then at the end, I actually, and again, different people have different kind of preferences or maybe tolerances for stuff, but I throw the notebooks away. Once it's
Wow.
on the computer, yeah, I just say thank you for your service and away it goes.
Nice. Yeah, I was. I use pencils a lot, and I looked at my hands and said, "Boy, these my fingers are black."
Yeah,
You
I
know,
know.
it's
It's you feel
lead.
like
It's
you feel like you're in school again. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a lefty. I'm a lefty too. So the pencil is it's a mess. It's a
yeah,
huge
me
mess.
too. You have to
Yeah,
get notebooks that lay flat and all that stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Tell me a little bit about your studio. We can see a little bit
yeah. A little bit.
behind you, but you're into a lot of things. So this is what's it like in there?
What's it like in here? I mean, it's a mess. Which I defend. Which I defend. Sometimes I walk in, and I go, man, what a mess. Well, look at all this junk. But and of course, one imagines the spotless, shining, kind of architect's studio, and it's all just bare wood and a coffee cup placed just so. But I sort of have this long lingering suspicion that in a really super clean studio workspace, nothing actually happens. Like nothing interesting actually happens. They're essentially for show. So this is not for show. This is for working, and it is the repository for all my books. Although I actually did a big clean out this summer, so
Mm,
it's I'm a little I've lightened my load a little. But I also have computers. The computer I'm using now, some computers that I run different kind of web programs on. I've got printing gear, a lot of printing gear
mhm,
now. I've got a risograph printer, which I just love. It's a
mm,
essential tool for all sorts of things. I've got you can't see it on the video feed, but I've got a big booklet maker, which is wonderful for making just, literally feed in stacks of paper and you get these wonderful folded and trimmed booklets at the other end.
mm.
And then, yeah, just a whole hodgepodge of other stuff. Media stuff. I call it the media lab. And so this is
The
kind of
media
like,
lab, yeah,
if you want to do something with some form of media, you probably can do it in here.
nice. So if you could have written any book, what would that book be?
Any book. Wow, what a good question. Well, I'll tell you my instinctive answer, and I don't know if it's the best, but sometimes the first thing that pops into your mind is revealing. It probably would be one of the culture novels by Ian Banks. Maybe like it kind of doesn't matter which one, Player of Games, say, because that's one of my favorites. I've said this before. I just think Ian M. Banks is a giant, just an incredible science fiction writer, for a lot of reasons, but mostly, I kind of think of imagination of the future, and some of it is that world building that you're talking about, just that really like, well, okay, well, but what is it really?
Mhm,
I think of that as like a muscle, because I actually think a lot of writers, maybe most really of fiction, could conjure a pretty good like near future in
mhm,
5 years or 10 years or 15. And we see that. I feel like that's actually become a very normal tool of literary fiction. Like forget genre, forget science fiction. I just feel like everybody's doing it. And that's fine. You just kind of need to be a good writer to be able to do that and have a kind of standard writer's imagination. I think you go further, 100 years, 200 years, into the Star Treks of the world or
mhm,
beyond. And I think it takes some training. I think there are muscles that you need to develop. You need to have like worked them. And if I'm right, and if we follow that analogy, then Ian Banks was the like Arnold Schwarzenegger of sci-fi. I mean, just bulging muscles, because his future is his world of the culture is set in this distant, remote, far future, really, really far away from anything that is here and now. And it's so compelling. I mean, it's spectacular. It's really inspiring too. It's
mm.
it's rare among science fiction futures. It's a future you actually would want to live in. It's a universe you would want to live in. So, I think those aspirations are probably fairly plain in Moonbound, in my latest novel. I tried to
Mm.
push myself in that direction, but I'm still just a weenie little gym rat compared to Ian Banks. So it'd be cool to have said, oh yeah, no problem. I did that.
Well, I'm looking forward to your next reps for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Keep
I'm
keep
working on it. I'm
keep
working on
going.
it.
Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think is the state today of science fiction and fantasy writing and publishing?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think it's unsettled because I think this is true across all different forms of media. It seems to me, including things that seem as disparate as like video games. We've always had genres, but it seems to me that, and this is just my own assessment, my own personal kind of take on it, but it seems like the genres have hardened and become almost like checklists. And you'll sometimes hear people talking about novels or video games or movies as sort of a a list of characteristics like, Robin Sloan came out with his fourth novel. What is it? Oh, well, it's a near future friends to lovers, thriller, vampire romance, with elements of, I don't know, noir or something. You're like, well, those are a bunch of tags, Yes,
It's like
I guess those would,
tokens. It's almost like
those would be
tokenizing.
those would be the tags on the Amazon product page. And I find that a little, I just, as a reader myself, I don't think about books that way. I don't kind of go looking for books that like check all my boxes, as it were. I mean, I do have boxes. I have things that I like.
Right.
But what excites me really, I just as an example, there's a terrific writer named Ray Naylor, who wrote a novel called The Mountain in the Sea, and then a newer one called Where the Axe is Buried. And like, for me, it's a big box and it says Ray Naylor. And you're like, check, because you want to follow that mind kind of wherever it goes. So that's not really much of a comprehensive diagnosis of the state of the the field right now. But I guess I'm eager for the moment when that pendulum swings in a slightly more open-ended and surprising direction. I don't think anybody really is well served by kind of the checklistification of any kind of media, really.
Mm. Is there anything that we forgot to talk about that you wanted to bring up that we should get into?
We talked obviously about AI and the future of AI and all that kind of stuff. In my sense of peril, I do think there's a real opportunity, and it's a growing opportunity for people who are interested in essentially doing things offline and producing things far away from the tensions and the kind of whatever, the morass, the vortex of all this stuff. And it's not just AI online. I mean, it's the way all these platforms work, which really, it's gotten really bad. I mean, it is to try to build an audience on the internet of 2025 and beyond. It's almost like you're just lighting incense sticks and making offerings to the gods, except the gods are the algorithms, and then some people kind of dutifully make their offerings and are rewarded, but lots and lots of people do it and there's nothing. And I think the thing that is so compelling about the physical world is it still does actually reward effort. Now, it doesn't reward it with, oh my gosh, I woke up and 10 million people had listened to my podcast, or watched my video. But that's fine. You didn't want 10 million people paying attention anyway. That's just nobody. It turns out that's not actually pleasant for anyone. You can find 100 readers and you can find 1,000 readers, and those readers might pay you real money to like buy a zine or, come to your reading at a bookstore, whatever it is. You mentioned my zine project earlier, and for me, that has been a hugely exciting thing in the last year or so, and I plan to continue it for the foreseeable future. It's been such a pleasure to send this real printed thing in the mail to people all over the world, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And so I think there's legitimate. People should feel some legitimate excitement about those opportunities, and it's almost like the more powerful the digital gets, and that's both the algorithms and these new AI things, I truly think the more attractive and just kind of fun the physical will become.
That's a great note to end on. I love that. I haven't cracked that one yet. A few years ago, I bought an old manual typewriter, and I just love typing on that thing. And then I realized, to actually produce anything longer than a letter is insane.
Yeah. Think about the way they used to make books. I read a lot of book history, and I sometimes, and you go back and you contemplate the laying out the pages with individual pieces of movable type, and you say, how did anyone ever print anything?
Yeah.
But they did.
Awesome.
They did.
Yeah. The care. Well, anyway, thanks so much for being on the show. This was really a pleasure. It was so nice to meet you. And
it was great. Yeah.
Great to hear what you're into and what you're working on.
Yeah. Thanks again, Lee. This was a real pleasure.